Who will tell us of the things of old, of the things of old, and of the things that have been? Of Ivashko, of that Ivashko, of Ivashko and the witch. There once lived an old couple who had one son called Ivashko. Ivashko, who was never called Ivan, was doted upon by his parents, who sought to shield him from all harm. When he sought to go fishing, his parents cried aloud in dismay, "What are you thinking about? You're still quite small. Suppose you get drowned. What good will there be in that, Ivashko?" But Ivashko was uperti, a stubborn child, and protested, No, I shan't get drowned. I'll catch you some fish. Let me go." So his mother put a white shirt on him and tied a red sash around his waist and let him go as he wished. Out in the boat he sat, and this boat obeyed his every command. He said, "Canoe, canoe, float a little farther, float a little farther," willing it forward across the water. Then the canoe floated on farther and farther, and Ivashko began to fish. When some time had passed, the old woman hobbled down to the riverside and called to her son, "Ivashko, Ivashko, my boy, float up to the waterside. I bring thee food and drink." For clearly the child was starving after a few hours. And Ivashko said, "Canoe, canoe, float to the waterside. That is my mother calling." The boat obediently floated to the shore. The woman took the fish, gave her boy food and drink, changed his shirt for him and his red sash, and sent him back to his fishing. Again he sat in his boat and said, "Canoe, canoe, float a little farther, float a little farther." And the canoe floated on farther and farther, and Ivashko began to fish once again. After time had passed, the old man had also hobbled down to the bank and called to his son, "Ivashko, Ivashko, my boy, float here, float to the waterside. I bring thee food and drink." And Ivashko replied, "Canoe, canoe, float to the waterside. That is my father calling." Once again the canoe obediently floated to the shore. The old man took the fish, gave the boy food and drink, because clearly he was starving, changed his shirt and his sash, because somehow he must have gotten dirty, and sent him back to his fishing. Now a certain witch had heard what Ivashko's parents had cried aloud to him, and she longed to get a hold of the boy. So she went down to the bank and cried in a hoarse voice, "Ivashko, Ivashko, my boy, float up onto the waterside. I bring thee food and drink." Ivashko realized that the voice was not his mother's, but was that of a witch. And he sang, "Canoe, canoe, float a little farther, float a little farther. That is not my mother, but a witch who summons me." The witch saw that she must call Ivashko with just such a voice as his mother had. So she hastened to a smith and said to him, "Smith, smith, make me such a thin little voice as Ivashko's mother has. If you don't, I'll put you in my oven and feast upon your flesh." So the smith, fearing such a fate, cunningly forged the witch a little voice such as Ivashko's mother's. Then the witch went down to the shore by night and sang, "Ivashko, Ivashko, my boy, float up onto the waterside. I bring thee food and drink." Ivashko came, and the witch took the fish and seized the boy and carried him to her home. When she arrived, she said to her daughter Alenka, "Heat the stove, heat the peach as hot as you can, and bake Ivashko well, while I go and collect my friends for the feast." So Alenka heated the stove hot, ever so hot, and said to Ivashko, "Come here and sit on this shovel." "I'm still very young and foolish," answered Ivashko. "I haven't yet quite got my wits about me. Please teach me how one ought to sit on a shovel." "Very good," said Alenka. "It won't take long to teach you. But the moment she sat down on the shovel, Ivashko instantly pitched her into the oven, slammed the iron plate shut, ran out of the hut, shut the door, and hurriedly climbed up ever so high an oak tree which stood nearby. Presently the witch arrived with her guests and knocked on the door of the hut, but nobody opened it for her. "Ah, that cursed Alenka!" cried the witch. "No doubt she's gone off somewhere to amuse herself." She then slipped in through the window, opened the door, let her guests in, then opened the oven, took out Alenka's baked body and served it up. They all ate their fill and drank their fill, and then, as witches do, they went out into the courtyard and began rolling about on the grass. "I turn about, I roll about, having fed upon Ivashko's flesh," cried the witch. "I turn about, I roll about, having fed upon Ivashko's flesh." But Ivashko called out to her, taunting from the top of the oak, "Turn about, roll about, having fed on Alenka's flesh." Then the witch looked up and saw Ivashko at the top of the oak. She rushed at the oak and began to gnaw away at it. And she gnawed and gnawed and gnawed, until at last she smashed 2 front teeth. Then she ran to a forge, and when she reached it, she cried, "Smith, Smith, make me some iron teeth." She threatened once again, "If you don't, I'll put you in my oven and feast upon you." So the fearful smith dutifully forged her 2 iron teeth. What else could he do, he reasoned. The witch returned and began gnawing and gnawing the oak again. She gnawed, and just on the point of gnawing through it, when Ivashko jumped out of it into another tree which stood by. The oak that the witch had gnawed through fell down to the ground, but then she saw that Ivashko was sitting atop another tree, so she gnashed her teeth in spite and set to work afresh to gnaw that tree as well. She gnawed and gnawed and gnawed, and broke 2 lower teeth, and ran off to the forge to threaten the smith again. "Smith, Smith," she cried when she got there, "make me some iron teeth. If you don't, I'll eat you." The smith forged 2 more iron teeth for her. She went back and once more began to gnaw the oak. Ivashko didn't know what he was to do now. He looked out and saw that swans and geese were flying high. So he called to them imploringly, "Oh, my swans and geese, take me on your pinions, bear me to my mother and father, to the cottage of my mother and father, there to eat and drink and live in comfort." 3 times he did this, but the first 2 flocks said, "Let those who follow carry you." And the 3rd flock of swans and geese took hold of him and carried him back, flew up to the cottage and dropped him in the upper room. Early the next morning, his mother set to work to bake pancakes, baked them, and all of a sudden fell to thinking about her boy. "Where is my Ivashko?" she cried. "Would that I could see him, if only in a dream." Then his father said, "I dreamed that swans and geese had brought our Ivashko home on their wings." And when she had finished baking the pancakes, she said, "Now then, old man, let us divide the cakes. There's for you, father, there's for me. There's for you, father, there's for me." "And none for me?" called out Ivashko. "Why, old man," said the wife, "go and see whatever that is up there." The father climbed up into the upper room, and there he found his son Ivashko. The 2 old people were delighted and asked their boy about everything that had happened. And as for the witch, nobody had heard from her again. It was at the feast I heard this tale. There it was, I drank mead ale. Though it flowed down my beard, my mouth stayed dry, for never a drop passed my lips, swear I.